There's something haunting about silence at a family dinner, the kind that isn't peaceful, but taut. It wraps around your neck like a silk scarf, just a bit too tight, soft enough to fool everyone watching, but suffocating underneath. That's how it felt that evening, the night my family gathered at my son's house, everyone dressed in Sunday best, pretending we still liked each other. The roast was dry, the wine was cheap, and the smiles were faker than the china plates we only used when trying to impress outsiders. I sat at the far end of the table, a glass of Pinot balanced between my fingers, watching my son, Marcus, slice a ribeye like it was the most important thing in the world. He was so careful, so painfully perfect, just like his wife, Leela. Leela, my daughter-in-law. She was radiant in the way only women who believe they've won some quiet war are. Her skin glowed under the chandelier, her long auburn hair twisted into a loose braid over one shoulder. She caught me watching and smiled, not politely, not warmly. The kind of smile you give when you know something the other person doesn't. I'd never trusted her. Not when she showed up 5 years ago with those innocent blue eyes and designer heels, claiming she just wanted a family. Not when Marcus dropped law school plans to follow her dream of running a vineyard 2 hours north. And definitely not when she started calling me mom before I ever gave her permission. But I played along. That's what we do in this family. We smile, we sip, we pretend. I thought that night would be no different. Another round of shallow compliments, jokes with no punchlines, and carefully veiled digs passed around like side dishes. I thought the worst thing that might happen was someone bringing up my ex-husband, or worse, my daughter who hadn't spoken to me in nearly a year. But then Leela stood up to refill her glass, leaned over behind me, and whispered something that shattered my world into 1,000 glassy shards. I'm pregnant with you. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. She pulled back with that same secret smile and walked to the kitchen like she hadn't just detonated a bomb under my life. My breath caught in my chest. The room spun. I watched my son laugh at something his uncle said, completely unaware that the woman he worships just twisted a dagger into my spine. My heart pounded in my ears, not because of what she said, but because of what I knew. What I had buried, what I had hidden, what I had done. And suddenly, everything, the wine, the fake laughter, the brittle smiles, turned into something grotesque. This wasn't a dinner. It was a reckoning, and Leela had just lit the fuse. I couldn't taste the wine after that. It might as well have been vinegar. I sat there, frozen in my chair, eyes locked on the floral centerpiece while the buzz of casual conversation swirled around me like static. My son kept reaching for Leela's hand like it was second nature, like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And maybe to him she was. That's what made this unbearable, because if Leela really meant what she whispered, and I had no doubt she did, then everything I thought I'd buried years ago was about to rise up and rip my family apart. I met Leela during the winter of Marcus's senior year in college. She was 24, beautiful in that practiced, social media kind of way, and immediately ingratiated herself with everyone. My sisters loved her. My husband, back when I still had one, thought she was charming. Even Marcus, who had always been cautious, methodical, almost frustratingly serious, seemed hypnotized by her energy. It was like she stepped into our lives and changed the lighting, made everyone feel like they were suddenly in a better movie. But I didn't trust how fast it all happened. I knew women like Leela. I had been a woman like Leela once. The kind who knows how to read a room and become exactly what each person wants. The kind who smiles just a little too long, compliments just a little too often, and always wins. Still, I said nothing. I kept my mouth shut when Marcus announced they were engaged 6 months later. I stayed silent when they moved into the house he inherited from my mother, the one I'd planned to renovate and maybe live in myself one day. I swallowed my suspicions every time Leela brushed past me with that sweet, syrupy "Hi Mom." That made my skin crawl. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was jealous of the closeness she had with my son. But now I knew. My instincts hadn't betrayed me. She was playing a long game, and tonight she had finally shown her hand. I excused myself from the table, muttering something about needing to call a friend. I passed through the hallway, my heels silent against the dark oak floors, and locked myself in the guest bathroom. My hands were shaking as I gripped the edge of the sink. I stared at myself in the mirror and tried to breathe. Pregnant with your what? Secret? Mistake? Husband? No, it couldn't be. That part of my life was over. It was a single, shameful chapter that I had ripped out and burned. No one else knew. Not Marcus. Not even my therapist. The only person who could have known was gone, or so I thought. But Leela knew. She didn't have to say the rest of the sentence because the look in her eyes had said it all. And suddenly it all clicked, the way she always pushed Marcus to distance himself from me. The way she encouraged him to forget birthdays, holidays, how she kept me out of every major life event as much as possible. It wasn't just ambition, it was personal. This wasn't just manipulation, this was revenge. But for what? And more importantly, how far was she willing to go? I splashed cold water on my face and dried it with trembling hands. The dinner wasn't over, but my role as the silent observer was. If Leela wanted war, she was about to learn that I had survived far worse than a smug little whisper in the dark. The difference between us was simple. She thought she was playing a game. I knew we were about to start a battle. I returned to the table with a steady face and a heart pounding like war drums. If anyone noticed the faint sheen of sweat on my forehead or the white knuckle grip I had on my wine glass, they didn't say a word. Maybe they were too wrapped up in their own shallow conversations, or maybe they'd learned, as I had, to leave uncomfortable things alone in this family. Leela didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She was glowing, humming softly to herself as she served potatoes onto Marcus's plate. Her fingers brushed his wrist, and he smiled at her like she was his salvation, like she was the air in his lungs. It made me sick, not because of what they had, but because of what I knew she was doing to him, and how deeply I had helped lay the groundwork for it all. Dinner dragged on for another hour. I said little, chewing tasteless bites, nodding when prompted, while my mind screamed behind my eyes. My family laughed around me, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Or maybe that's what made it worse, that we were all so used to pretending that no one noticed I was drowning. By the time dessert was served, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood. All eyes turned toward me. Even Marcus looked concerned. "Mom, you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a bit tired. I think I'll head home early." Leela tilted her head, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. "Are you sure? You haven't even tried my cheesecake. It's your favorite." I met her eyes, cold, calculating, daring me to make a scene. Some other time. And then I left, but not because I was retreating. I just needed space. Not to cry, not to panic, but to plan. Because if she knew about my past, I needed to know exactly how. And why now? That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room in the dark, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that went cold hours ago, my thoughts moving in 1,000 jagged directions. The memories came back sharper than I wanted. It had been over 15 years ago. A mistake, a betrayal, a night I had never told anyone about. It was after Marcus's father and I had separated, though we hadn't told the kids yet. We were living like ghosts in the same house, barely speaking, coexisting. I was lonely, vulnerable, and angry. And then one night, at a company holiday party, after too many glasses of champagne and not enough judgment, I let something happen that should never have happened. One night, with someone I barely knew. It meant nothing to him. It ruined everything for me. I found out I was pregnant 2 months later, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I lied. I said the baby was my ex-husband's. I said we'd had a moment of reconciliation before finally deciding to divorce. Everyone believed me. Marcus was young. He never asked questions. And when I miscarried halfway through the pregnancy, I thought that was the end of it, the secret buried with a child I never got to know. So how did Leela know? The timing was too perfect. She hadn't just learned this by accident. She had waited, calculated, until now. Until Marcus was firmly in her grip. Until she had a house, a name, a place in the family. And now she was threatening to blow it all open. Or worse, use it. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. One was to my oldest friend, Julia, a former paralegal who owed me more than one favor. The other was to a private investigator. If Leela wanted to play with secrets, I'd show her just how sharp mine could be, because I knew things too. I had watched her too long, too carefully, not to have my own quiet file of doubts and inconsistencies. Now it was time to dig, and as I sat in my car outside their house later that week, waiting for Marcus to leave for work, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The house was quiet when I knocked. I had timed it perfectly. Marcus had just left for the office, and I knew Leela didn't have any appointments that morning. Her car sat in the driveway, immaculate as always. The hedges were trimmed to perfection, the porch swept clean, the little seasonal wreath on the door a perfect Pinterest touch. It was all so curated, so calculated, just like her. She opened the door with a practiced smile that faltered for just a split second when she saw me. Not enough for most people to notice, but I wasn't most people. "Mom," she said, her voice laced with false warmth. "This is a surprise." "I'm sure it is," I said calmly, stepping past her into the foyer before she could stop me. "We need to talk." She closed the door behind me slowly, like she was bracing herself. "Marcus isn't here." "I know. That's why I'm here." I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw it. Not just the smugness, but the fear behind her eyes. She hadn't expected me to confront her so directly. She had expected the silent version of me, the one who let things go, the one who kept peace at any cost. That version of me was gone. I didn't ask her what she meant the other night. I didn't need to. Instead, I said, "What do you want?" She blinked. "I'm sorry? You obviously know something, and you didn't whisper that at dinner just to shock me. So, what is it? Money? Power? Leverage over Marcus? Or do you just want to watch me fall apart?" There it was again. That flicker of unease. She crossed her arms, leaning against the banister like it was a stage cue. "You think this is about you?" "I know it is," I snapped, "because no one carries a secret that long just to whisper it during cheesecake. You came into this family with a plan, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." She didn't answer. Not directly, but her lips twitched, and she said, with maddening calm, "I know more than you think. About a lot of things." My jaw clenched. "Then say it." She stepped closer, so close I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive, like crushed gardenias and smugness. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I know who the father was, the baby you lost, and I know you lied to everyone, including Marcus." I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give her that. But inside, the blood drained from my face. "How?" I asked, more steady than I felt. She gave a soft laugh. "You think secrets stay buried in this town? Small places remember. People talk. I met someone who remembered you very well. Let's just say your champagne mistake left an impression." That sick feeling crawled up my spine like ice. She had done her homework, dug into a past I had scrubbed clean, and now she was waving it in my face like a torch. "I'm pregnant," she added, tilting her head slightly. "And before you ask, yes, Marcus is the father. But I thought you'd want to know what I'm capable of, in case you ever tried to come between us again." That was the real message, not the pregnancy, not the whisper. She was showing me that she held the knife now. That she could destroy everything I had left if I dared push back. I left without another word. I didn't trust myself to speak. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my car keys. But as I drove away, her threat began to turn in my mind like a key in a lock. Not fear, not shame, strategy. Because if Leela had secrets about me, I was going to find hers. And if she wanted to test just how far I'd go to protect my son, she was about to learn the hard way. I don't lose. Not to manipulators. Not to liars. And certainly not to someone who thought she could turn my own past into a noose around my neck. Leela had declared war, and I had just decided to burn everything she loved to the ground. 3 days later, I held a manila folder in my hands thick enough to feel like a loaded weapon. My investigator, Charles Griggs, 62, bald, retired NYPD, dropped it onto my kitchen table that morning like he was setting down a brick. No preamble, no chatter. Just a grim nod and the faint smell of aftershave. "You were right about her," he said. "She's clean on the surface, but dig deep enough, and the rot shows." I waited until he left before opening it, not because I needed privacy. No one came to my house uninvited anymore, but because I wanted to savor it, like the moment before a symphony begins, where the air holds its breath. Inside were printouts, photos, records, all arranged with Charles's signature precision, bank statements that didn't add up, rental properties in someone else's name, a few offshore deposits that weren't declared on her taxes. And then, the jackpot, a name I didn't recognize at first. Peter Langdon. I flipped to the notes. Peter Langdon, 39, arrested twice for fraud, once for identity theft, former fiancé to one Leela Worthington, before she reinvented herself and changed her last name. And here's the real kicker. He wasn't just a con artist. He was her partner, the man behind the curtain, the one who taught her how to move money, how to change names, how to hide a paper trail. According to Charles's notes, they'd vanished from their hometown 6 years ago, right after an investigation into embezzlement at a local nonprofit mysteriously fell apart. She reappeared a year later, newly single, scrubbed clean, and calling herself Leela Bennett. That was 2 months before she met Marcus. I stared at the timeline for a long moment, my hands shaking not from fear this time, but from a cold, coiled rage. She had played all of us. This wasn't just a manipulative daughter-in-law. This was a woman with a history of scams, a pattern of reinvention, and a talent for destruction. And now she was pregnant with my grandchild. I needed proof. Real proof. Something I could use to make Marcus see. Because right now, he wouldn't believe a word of it. Not from me. Not from anyone. He'd accuse me of jealousy, of trying to destroy his marriage, of never liking her in the first place. I'd raised him too well. He still thought love was supposed to mean trust. So I did the only thing I could. I followed her. The next afternoon, I parked across the street from a strip mall an hour outside the city, far enough to feel anonymous, close enough to reach in under 2 hours. I'd tracked her here using a GPS ping Charles helped install under her car. Legal? Probably not. Necessary? Absolutely. I watched through binoculars as Leela stepped into a coffee shop on the far end of the lot. 5 minutes later, a man in a gray hoodie and sunglasses joined her. He looked nervous, fidgety, and even from a distance, I could see it, the familiarity. The way she leaned toward him like old lovers or old partners. He wasn't a friend, he was a loose end. I snapped photos with my phone, one after another, as they talked, then argued, then parted ways. Her expression when she left was tight, pinched. Something had gone wrong. I followed her back to the city, keeping 3 cars behind. I felt alive, like I hadn't in years. All the numbness I'd carried, all the silence I'd swallowed for the socket of keeping peace, it was gone, burned away by clarity. This woman had married my son under false pretenses. She had weaponized my secrets against me, and now she was scheming behind his back with a man who once stood trial for fraud. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protection. Because if I didn't stop her, she would bleed my son dry, emotionally, financially, maybe even legally. And when she was finished, she'd disappear again, just like she always had. But not this time. This time she picked the wrong family, the wrong mother, and I was done waiting. I wasn't naive. Just having dirt on Leela wasn't enough. I'd watched her manipulate Marcus for years, twist his loyalty, blur his logic, weaponize his love. He saw her through the lens she handed him, polished and curated. To tear that down, I needed more than suspicion and grainy photos. I needed something irrefutable, unignorable, undeniably hers, and I had a feeling she'd eventually give it to me herself. The next few days, I became someone else entirely. I stopped answering my sister's calls. I postponed my meetings at the local charity board. I spent my days at my desk, my laptop open, cross-referencing addresses, bank activity, case numbers, social profiles, anything and everything that might pull a thread in the fabric of her story. And late one night, it unraveled. A rental unit in upstate New York, registered to a shell company, not in Leela's name, but to one that had come up in Charles's report. She had visited it twice in the last month, according to toll records. It had no utilities listed, and inside the files Charles dug up, there were 2 withdrawal slips tied to that shell company. One for $4,200, one for $11,000, both within the last 90 days, both under the radar from Marcus's accounts. I drove out there the next morning, rented a car under a different name. It felt dramatic, sure, but I wasn't taking chances. The house was small, worn down, tucked behind a shuttered gas station and a crumbling billboard. I let myself in with a key Charles had obtained from the rental office, and what I found inside chilled me. Boxes, files, envelopes, a printer, a laptop with no password, and dozens of fake ID, different names, different states. All with photos of Leela, her face altered slightly each time, darker hair here, a different jawline there, but it was her. The same cold eyes behind every disguise. She had set up an escape hatch, or a new identity, maybe both, but there was no denying it. She had no intention of staying put, and that meant she wasn't just playing my son, she was planning to leave him. I spent nearly an hour photographing everything, the receipts, the documents, even a half-burned note in the trash bin that read, "He doesn't know." Yet, that was all I needed. But just as I was locking the door behind me, I saw it, a black SUV, parked 2 blocks down, engine idling. I didn't stop to think. I slid into the driver's seat and pulled away, circling the block once. The SUV followed, just once, no more, then it vanished. She knew. Somehow, Leela knew I had gotten close. Maybe the man she met had tipped her off. Maybe she'd noticed something missing. Or maybe, like me, she had a sixth sense for when the walls began closing in. When I returned home, a courier envelope was waiting for me on the front step. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in smooth cursive. Inside was a photo. Me, at the rental house, standing in a doorway, my face turned just slightly toward the street. On the back, "Careful, Mom. Marcus doesn't take betrayal well." No signature, no blood, no overt threat, just a warning, a shot across the bow. And it hit its mark, not because I was scared, but because I finally understood just how far Leela was willing to go. She wasn't afraid of being caught. She was daring me to act. She was inviting the war now, and that was her first real mistake. Because while Leela had spent years weaving lies, I had spent a lifetime learning how to cut through them. She was a brilliant actress. But I was done being part of her show. She wanted to bring Marcus into this, use his love like a shield, hide behind the baby, force me into silence through fear. But she had forgotten one thing. A mother doesn't back down when her child is in danger. She burns the house to save them. and I had just struck the first match. The next morning, I stood in front of my full-length mirror, buttoning up a navy blazer I hadn't worn in years. The shoulders were a bit tight, and the collar tugged awkwardly at my neck, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about comfort. It was about armor. There's a version of yourself you store away, for funerals, for courtrooms, for war. The version that doesn't flinch, doesn't weep, doesn't compromise. I hadn't needed her in years, but now she stood in the mirror, staring back at me, calm and ready. I started by contacting my attorney, Meredith Lang. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I said Leela's name and added the words financial misconduct and identity fraud, her tone sharpened immediately. By noon, we had scheduled a meeting. By 1:30, Meredith was sitting across from me in her glass-walled office downtown, scanning through my stack of documents, photographs, and bank slips with a look that shifted from curiosity to pure disbelief. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "She's building an exit plan. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, new identities. You're not just dealing with a gold digger, you're dealing with a professional." "I know," I said, "and I need this airtight." Meredith nodded. "We'll start building a financial abuse case. If we can prove she's siphoning assets or setting Marcus up for debt, we can bring him in before she vanishes. But you'll have to tread carefully. If she gets even a whiff of legal action, she'll go underground. And she won't come back." "I'm counting on that," I said, voice steady. "But not before she's exposed." That night, I hosted a dinner of my own. Just Marcus, Leela, and me. I told them I wanted to make amends, that I'd overreacted, that I was tired of the tension. Leela, ever the chameleon, accepted graciously. Marcus looked relieved, and that alone nearly cracked my composure. My son, still believing in the fantasy, still protecting the woman who had turned his life into a chessboard. I prepared everything myself, cooked the dishes he loved as a child, set the table with candles and linen napkins, even poured the same wine I'd served on his high school graduation. Nostalgia has a way of disarming people, and I needed him open. We ate. We laughed, or pretended to. Leela played her role perfectly, throwing in compliments, anecdotes, even asking about my garden like nothing had ever happened. And then, just as dessert began, I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Just something I think you should see." He hesitated. Leela shifted in her seat, eyes narrowing, pulse ticking at her throat. He opened it. Inside was a selection, carefully chosen, of what I had gathered. Not the worst of it. Not yet. Just enough. Photocopies of the fake ID, the fraudulent deposits, a still from the security footage outside the upstate house, her silhouette framed in the doorway, and at the very top, a summary written by Charles Griggs. Pattern of deception, potential financial fraud, history of identity manipulation. The room went silent. Marcus read, slowly, painfully. His hands trembled by the time he reached the final page. He didn't speak for nearly a full minute. When he did, it wasn't to me. It was to her. "Is this true?" Leela didn't blink. She looked at him with wide, glistening eyes. "Baby, she's twisting everything." "I can explain." "Then explain," I said, voice low, controlled. "Start with Peter Langdon. Then tell him why you've been wiring money out of your joint account into shell companies registered in Nevada." Her eyes darkened. The performance cracked for a split second, not enough for Marcus to see, but I saw it. The calculation, the cold fury behind the betrayal. She hadn't expected me to move this fast. And she definitely hadn't expected me to come for her legally. Marcus pushed back from the table, standing slowly. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Leela, what is this?" She reached for his hand. "This is your mother trying to destroy us." I stood too. "No, Leela. This is your past catching up to you. And trust me, this is the polite version." I didn't stay to watch the full unraveling. I gave Marcus a long look, one that said "I'm here when you're ready to talk," and left. The rest of the implosion needed to happen without me. He had to face her lies on his own. But I wasn't done. The next day, Meredith filed a formal petition to freeze the assets in their joint accounts. I sent an anonymous tip to the local business fraud division, attaching documentation of the shell companies. And Charles? He delivered the last piece, security footage of Leela at a bank meeting with someone under an alias, the final nail. She wanted war. I had delivered ruin. By Friday, the fallout was impossible to contain. The first domino fell when Marcus's bank account froze. Leela had no warning, not until her debit card was declined at a boutique downtown. She tried to call Marcus. He didn't pick up. She tried again, straight to voicemail. Then she stormed into his office unannounced, only to be stopped by the front desk secretary. Marcus had left early, unreachable, in meetings. That's when she must have realized he was starting to slip out from under her fingers, that the grip she'd held so tightly was beginning to loosen. The second domino hit harder. The anonymous fraud report I filed with Charles's help landed in the inbox of a very interested IRS agent, a woman named Devlin, who didn't care about fake smiles or high-end clothes or misunderstood women. What she cared about was movement across state lines, unreported income, and ties to known financial criminals. And Leela's name had just hit all 3 markers. By the time Marcus called me, 2 days later, his voice raw with confusion and disbelief, I already knew the storm had broken. He asked me to come over, alone. I found him in the living room, still in yesterday's clothes, hunched over a folder of printed bank records and legal notices. The house was quiet, too quiet. "She's gone," he said, without looking up. "Where?" He shook his head. "She left this morning. Said she needed space. Took the car. Packed a suitcase. No note. No message." I sat down beside him, slowly. "Do you believe me now?" He didn't answer right away. Then he picked up the envelope I'd given him days ago, now creased, crumpled. "Read and reread." I didn't want to. I kept thinking maybe she had reasons. Maybe you misunderstood. "And now?" He exhaled. "Now I don't know who I married." I let the silence hang between us, heavy but honest. He was unraveling. And yet, somewhere in the collapse, there was clarity. He wasn't a fool. He was a man who had loved the wrong person. And I, of all people, knew exactly how that felt. "She's not just running," I said carefully. "She's repositioning. That's what people like her do. She'll wait for the dust to settle, then reappear under a new name, new hair color, new story. She's done it before." "And the baby?" I met his eyes. "That's the one piece we can't control. But you can still protect what's left. Yourself. Your future. Everything she hasn't stolen yet." He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just sat there, holding the truth like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. That evening, Marcus did what I hadn't dared to hope for. He filed for divorce. He froze all remaining assets. He gave Meredith full cooperation. And most importantly, he gave me his trust, something I had feared I'd lost forever. But Leela didn't disappear quietly. Oh no. She called me a week later, a blocked number, but I knew the voice instantly. "You think you won?" She hissed. "I don't think." I said, calm as glass. "I know." She laughed. Not a real laugh, a bitter, ragged sound, more like the cracking of ice than anything human. "You're a fool. You think you've ruined me? You haven't even touched the surface." "Then I suggest you dig deep," I said. "Because next time, I'm not just freezing your accounts. I'm handing over your passport." Silence. Click. The call ended. It didn't matter. Her bluff was weak. Her empire, carefully built on lies and manipulation, was already crumbling, and I made sure the wreckage was permanent. But this wasn't just about punishing Leela. This was about reclaiming the years she stole, the trust she poisoned, the sun she tried to turn against me. She had thought she could corner me with secrets. But she forgot one thing. I had survived worse than her, and I didn't lose. Not then. Not now. It's strange how quickly the wreckage settles. One day the world is unraveling around you, and the next it just stops. The dust hangs still in the air, and you're left standing in the center, blinking, wondering how silence can feel so loud. A month passed. The divorce proceedings had begun. The fraud investigation widened, and Leela, or whatever name she was using now, had vanished into whatever corner of the world she retreated to when her mask stopped working. Marcus moved back into the city. He stayed with me for a few weeks, quiet and withdrawn, the shine in his eyes dimmed by too many truths hitting at once. At first, he spoke little, mostly yes or no, short nods, staring out the window like it held answers. I didn't push. He needed time to stop bleeding before he could start healing. Then one morning, over coffee, he said it. I knew. I looked up from my cup. "What?" He didn't blink. I knew something was off, not at the beginning, but later, after the wedding. The secrecy, the disappearances, the strange charges she said were for business. I saw the red flags. I just ignored them. I set my cup down. "Because you loved her." He nodded. "And because I was afraid that if I questioned it, it would all fall apart. And if it fell apart, what would that say about me? About who I chose?" That was the part no one talks about when betrayal hits. The shame. The feeling that you should have seen it, you should have stopped it, that you let it in. Even when the liar is brilliant, even when the deception is layered like armor, you still feel responsible. "She was a con artist," I said. "Professionally, emotionally, romantically. You didn't fail. You were targeted." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the night everything broke, I saw his shoulders release, just a little, the burden lifting piece by piece. Later that week, we received a certified letter from a law firm in Atlanta. Inside was a short notice from Leela's lawyer, a statement confirming her intent to relinquish any claims to Marcus's assets in exchange for immunity from litigation. Signed, stamped, and emotionless. She wasn't fighting. She was cutting loose. Like she always had. But what stuck with me wasn't her surrender. It was the second envelope that came the next morning. No sender. Just a hospital name in the corner. Westlake OB/GYN. Confidential records enclosed. I opened it on the porch. The wind was gentle, birds chirping, and in my hands, everything stilled. Inside was a single page, a sonogram, a due date, a patient name, Leela Bennett, and a sticky note. Tell him if you want, but I'll never let you near this child. My heart stopped, not because I doubted the child existed, but because I knew Leela, and this was her final move. Not a plea, not a threat. A final, spiteful promise. She didn't want the baby for love. She wanted it for power. Even now, even in exile, she was reaching across state lines, across silence and scandal, trying to hold on to one last card. And Marcus didn't know. I folded the paper slowly, the edges cutting into my fingers like thin blades. My first instinct was rage. To call every lawyer I had. To storm into a courtroom and demand custody battles and genetic testing and every damn right my son was entitled to. But then I stopped, because what if that's what she wanted? To drag us into another war, another legal swamp, another decade of damage. What if this wasn't a threat, but bait? No, not this time. This time, I would decide what mattered. And right now, that wasn't her. It was Marcus, and it was the future we still had. I didn't tell Marcus that day. I didn't show him the letter. I didn't mention the sonogram or the cruel little note that came with it. Instead, I made him breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast with too much butter, the way he liked it when he was 12, and the world felt simpler. He asked about job leads. I told him I'd talked to a friend at the architecture firm. He asked if I wanted to go walk by the lake that evening. I said yes. We spoke like two people finally learning how to breathe again after years of choking on unsaid things. Because the truth was, there had already been enough pain, enough fights, enough wounds reopened and dragged across broken glass. And I was tired, not in the way that sleep could fix, but in the way a person gets when they've watched someone they love almost lose themselves. When you've held them at their lowest and realized you'd burn the entire world down just to keep them standing. I'd won the war against Leela, but the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like quiet, like calm after a hurricane, and I wasn't going to let her pull us back into the storm. So I called Meredith. I asked her to track the legal limits of Leela's parental claims across state lines, quietly, cautiously, not to build a case, but to prepare for one, just in case. Then I locked the sonogram and the letter in my safe, and I chose silence. For now, because if Leela really wanted to raise the child as leverage, she'd make a mistake eventually. He'd get greedy, or sloppy, or tired of pretending to play the loving mother when all she knew was manipulation and control. And when she did, we'd be ready. But until then, I wasn't going to let her poison what was left of our lives. Marcus began to heal. Slowly, I saw it in the way he started smiling at strangers again. In the way he fixed the leaky faucet in my kitchen without me asking. In the way he began planning for the future, not as a man recovering from heartbreak, but as one finally stepping out of the shadow of someone else's lies. One evening, we walked along a lake trail just before sunset. The sky was streaked with lavender and gold, the water so still it looked like glass. We didn't talk much. Just walked, side by side, mother and son, survivors both. He paused at the edge of the pier, staring out. I keep wondering if any of it was ever real. It was, I said softly. Your love was real. That's what matters. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. You think she'll come back? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Then, I think she already knows better. We stood in silence for a while longer, and in that silence something shifted, something settled. It wasn't closure, not exactly. But it was peace, a beginning. I had spent years pretending for the sake of harmony. I had swallowed my instincts, suppressed my judgment, and let a stranger put her roots into my family tree. But I had cut them out now, ways in and all. She was gone. And what remained, what survived, was mine again. My home, my son, my future. So if she ever came back, it wouldn't be with whispers. It would be with a courtroom. And this time, I'd be waiting, with everything she ever feared I'd become.